Okay, so welcome back, everybody. I'll give my apologies for not being around the last 2 weeks. But as I'd like to say, we celebrate Hanukkah, we celebrate the Greek victory, because they try to make us stop learning Torah. So our custom is we close yeshivot and we go on vacation and we don't learn Torah for 8 days. So that's one reason we canceled the class. Now we can do a tikkun. Right? No, seriously. So we basically missed all Sefer Melakhim, pretty much, which is actually good because I'm going to give one class on Sefer Melakhim, which is Introduction to the Nevi'im Achronim. I'll explain why. I think the Shnayim LeYom just started Isaiah, if I'm not mistaken. And if I share my screen real fast, in opening line of the book of Yeshayahu, Hazon Yishar ben Amotz, and we mentioned 3 kings, Uziel, Yotam, Achaz, and Chizkiel, 4 kings, the kings of Yehuda. So what's that mean? If you want to understand what Yeshayahu was talking about, you need to know the time period. Now, I want to talk about the major difference between Nevi'im, Rishonim, and Achronim. It's not earlier or later, because what happens in Sefer Melakhim overlaps almost all of Nevi'im Achronim. But the difference is basically in style, where Nevi'im Achronim, like we'll start with the book of Isaiah, it's a collection of his Nevuot. Basically, let's say you're a shul rabbi, and you gave speeches every Shabbos, and you wrote them up. So at the end of a couple of years, what do? You make a book, you make a collection of all your different sermons. So the analogy I like to give all the time, let's say you're doing some excavation or remodeling some shul in Washington, D.C., and you find in the attic, there's a geniza there, some leftover books, and you find a notebook of all the rabbi speeches from 1860 to 1865. 5 years of rabbi speeches for those 5 years. Now, if you look at those speeches and you know your American history, you have a gold mine. Why? Because it's right during the Civil War. And then, now, those speeches won't include the history of the Civil War, but you might be able to figure out some history of what's going on based on those speeches. But to understand those sermons that the rabbi gave, you need to know what's happening in the Civil War to appreciate what the rabbi's talking about in shul. Hope that got the idea? Therefore, Yeshayahu and later Yirmiyahu and Yechezkel, the Nevuot that they gave during their time periods, if you don't understand what's happening in their time period, you can't appreciate what they're talking about. Or you can understand it, but you won't really appreciate what they're doing and their message if you don't know what's happening during that time period. So we'll see that a lot as we go through Nevi'im Achronim. So today what I want to do, I want to give a crash course on Sefer Melakhim. I'll share with you we'll see a little chart in a minute, or I call it the sine wave, that will explain almost the whole book. And like with every book, I'm trying to explain is what's the purpose of its composition. And the purpose of composition is definitely not just to tell you all Jewish history. According to Chazal, our Sefer Yirmiyahu was composed by or redacted by Yirmiyahu, which means it's being written in the time when the temple is being destroyed. Now, Yirmiyahu isn't writing everything what happened in the time of Shlomo and Eliyahu and Elisha, etc. Rather, he's quoting earlier Nevi'im, the same thing we saw in our Sefer Shmuel, who the author of Sefer Shmuel is quoting the works of Shmuel, remember Natan and God. And we saw Shmuel, when he writes Sefer Shoftim, is quoting the works of earlier Shoftim or earlier Nevi'im. So the Navi redacting the book, putting the book together, is going to be Yirmiyahu, but he's quoting earlier Nevi'im. Now the question is, what's he quoting and what's the purpose of his selective quotes? So again, I can learn history from the book, and the book presents its events in historical order. But the book must have some prophetic agenda. What I want to suggest is, because Yirmiyahu is the Navi living in the time of the Churban, he needs to explain what caused the Churban to happen. So that's going to be one topic. There's another major topic, though, which I want to sort of allude to, is that in addition to explaining why the first temple was destroyed, because his own book talks about that much more in detail, he also needs to explain and wants to make sure when they do come back in Beit Sheni, there'll be one capital city and there'll be a united kingdom. Now, during the first temple period, where the temple should be built was up for grabs, wasn't it? Wasn't there a big fight over where the temple should be? I use that to explain the background for Sefer Shmuel, because the people of the northern kingdom are claiming the place for God's house should be in Beit El, and Yerushalayim is not legitimate. Remember, I tried to explain why I need Sefer Shmuel to explain that Malchut David is legitimate, because once Beit David is not legitimate, then Yerushalayim is not legitimate, and makes Beit El is legitimate. And the northern kingdoms. No, to prove my legitimacy, I have to delegitimize my opponent. Now, once Yerushalayim is chosen, Yirmiyah wants to make sure that that choice remains forever. Now, all through Sefer Melakhim, tell me if you noticed, every king gets a report card. Anyone notice the report card every king gets in their opening lines? Someone tell me what grading system does Sefer Melakhim use for its kings?
F and an A.
They don't use A, B, C, D, but there is a grading system. It's almost it sounds almost like a pass-fail system. If you're a good king, what's it say? No, that's the A minus and B. It says Vayas Hayashar B'nei Hashem or Vayas Hara B'nei Hashem. Because every king, when they're introduced usually the king, sometimes the parent, the mother's name or the father's name, how many years he reigned for, etc. Always followed by what's called a shiput. Was he good or bad? Sort of like past Vayas Hara B'nei Hashem or Vayas Hatov B'nei Hashem. Or Vayas Hayashar B'nei Hashem or Hara B'nei Hashem. All good or bad. Sometimes an A plus, sometimes a pass plus, sometimes a pass minus. Okay, what's a classic A minus? It was Vayas Hayashar B'nei Hashem, Rak habavot lo saru. Correct? No, you can do good, but the bamot are still around. And a bad king is Vayas Hara B'nei Hashem, like who? Like Yerovam ben Nevat, like the sin of Yerovam ben Nevat. Now, what was the sin of Yerovam ben Nevat? Oh, 1 second. I want to check that off for me. What was the sin of Yerovam ben Nevat? Yerovam ben Nevat basically...
He divided everything.
Now he divided, he set up the bamot. In other words, you can't mess... What makes David Hayashar B'nei Hashem? Oh, I'm sorry. An A plus is Hayashar B'nei Hashem ke David. If you're like David, that's an A plus. If you're like David but a little bit down, is Rak habavot lo saru. What did David do? David established Yerushalayim as the place to build the Beit HaMikdash. And Shlomo builds it there. But even time of Shlomo, we can't get rid of the bamot. We don't get rid of the bamot until Chizkiyahu's time period. Okay? Okay. So Arlene asked a good question. Why are so many kings identified by their mother's names? It seems like there was a position called the Gvira, like the Queen Mother, and she pulled a lot of clout. In other words, the king's mother was an official position, and she made a lot of decisions for the king. Sometimes the king's wife, sometimes the king's mother. But that's called the Gvira. We have that with Asa, I think, with Ma'acha, earlier in the kingdom. But we find that it seems like the name of the mother has important. She was an important. When we name the mother, usually she's an important position. Later, we have to get rid of the queen mother. That'll happen several times. So what I want to suggest is that what's going to tie the book together. One of the key points Yirmiyah wants to make is to make sure that when they come back the next time in Beit Sheni, it'll only be Yerushalayim and there won't be a split kingdom over where the temple needs to be built. And if you know what happens in Beit Sheni, Yerushalayim, there's no question about Yerushalayim. And anyone who questions Yerushalayim, he becomes a Shomroni. He's not Jewish anymore. Remember, there's an alternate temple in Shechem, or in Har Gerizim, which is, and those people follow that temple. They're not considered part of the Jewish people anymore. But back to our book, what I want to do now is use this background to explain what's happening in the book and what's included, what's not included. So I'm going to share with you what I call my sine wave. I'll share my screen. Izzy, are you able to share a file with the group?
A file?
If I send you a file, you can share it. I'll put it online.
To the WhatsApp group.
Yeah, we'll send it to the group later on. You don't need it now in front of you.
Okay. Yeah.
I'll just share it here. Okay. I call this my sine wave, and I'll try to explain it. Hope everyone can see it. I'll put that up to the top, and now there. Now, I'll explain. I need a highlighter, annotate, and I want to highlight. Highlight. I don't want to draw. I want to highlight. Here we go. Spotlight. Okay. You see my little spotlight? Is it the right color? Make it another. Yeah, red's good. Should make it bigger. Spotlight. Okay. So This is, I call the sine wave. Maybe it's a cosine. I forgot exactly how it goes, but that's the wave. And what's it measuring? So from left to right, this direction is time. I begin from the time of the Shoftim, Malchut David, basically the Malchut Shlomo, basically the kingdom, all the way to the Khurban. So from left to right is time. The y-axis, the height, that's the tricky one. It's basically what's the state of the nation. In other words, how well is life in the land of Israel? Are we united? Number one, is the economy good? Do we have wars? Are we economically strong and sound? Are we our borders shrinking? Do we have wars with outside enemies? Basically, how good is life in the land of Israel? Where I'm marking Shlomo's reign as a high point in Jewish history, because that's what it seems to be. It was never better than the time of Shlomo, pretty much, because we have peace. There's no wars during the time of Shlomo Melech. Our economy is great. We're doing wonderful. Other people are coming to us. Now the nations don't fight us, but other nations want to marry our king even. And Shlomo was able to marry wives from like the many foreign wives, which basically means a lot of diplomatic relationships. But things are going great in time of Shlomo. Everything falls apart when they split the kingdom with Mered Yerovam. And then Egypt takes over. We'll see in a minute. Then there's ups and downs. What we're going to see, whenever we're united, things are going great. That's a high point. Like Yoshaphat Achav, we'll see Uziel Yerovam. Whenever we're fighting with each other, whenever the kingdom is not just split, but they fight with each other, that's when things are the worst. This would be a good topic for us for the fast day coming up as well. Now, it gets really more complicated towards the end, but that's the y-axis. No, it's not necessarily how firm we are, but rather how good is life in the country. Now, on top, these are the foreign powers that control the area during each time period. So during the time of Shaul and David, the enemy is the Plishtim, and David's able to get rid of them, the Plishtim, and by the time of Shlomo, they're no longer a threat. Egypt becomes a superpower that conquers the land during the time of Yerovam and Rechavam. And then the first time we recover from Egyptian rule is during the time of Yoshaphat and Achav, where they work together, and that's going to be it's two kingdoms, but they marry after children to each other, and the country's doing great, and our army is strong, our economy is great. Then Aram comes in and pretty much gives us, Aram is basically Damascus or Syria today. They take over and things get really bad again during the time of Yehu and the Yehu's revolt. Things get better again under Uziel and Yerovam. Just reviewing everything happened in Sefer Melakhim. Then Ashur comes in, and little by little Ashur wipes everything out until there's a short recovery under Chizkiel. Doesn't last very long. Things down again under Menachem. Finally, there's one last recovery under Yoshiel. And then finally, afterwards, we have the Khurban. First Galut Yoachin and then Galut Tzidkiel. So that's the and then Babylonia comes in and takes over in the time of the Khurban. So on top, these are the superpowers who control us or give us a hard time. And down below, I'm saying, and this is the state, these are our kings and how good or bad things are in Israel. And then on the bottom, we have the prophets of each time period. Shmuel is the prophet in the time of Shaul and David. Natan, later in the time of David and Shlomo. Achia Shiloni is the split kingdom. Eliyahu and Elisha is the time of Achav and during the time of Yehu. And then we have the plethora of Nevi'im, which are starting now, Yeshayahu, Hosea, Amos, etc. They're all between Uziel, Yerovam, Yotam, Achaz, Chizkiel during this time period over here. And then finally, a couple of small Nevi'im, Tzfani and Nahum, etc. And then you have Yirmiyahu and Yechezkel in the time of the Khurban. So Yirmiyahu and Yechezkel are there during the time of the Babylonian rule. The four Nevi'im, Hosea, Yeshaya, Amos, and Micha, time of Ashur. Eliyahu and Elisha in the time of Aram. And Achia Shiloni is the time when Egypt takes over. And before him was Shmuel and Natan in the time of King David and Shlomo. Everyone understand the sine wave pretty much? Now, let me stop the share for a minute and have a quick discussion. What would a frum Jew expect? There should be a correlation between the y-axis and our frumkeit. Got my point? In other words, when should things be good? When we're religious. When should things be bad? When we're not religious. In other words, there should be a linear relationship between how well we're keeping the mitzvot in contrast to how well our economy and our security is. And if I go back to our sine wave, what do we see? It's really true in the time of King David and Shlomo, things get good and we're following God. But things go bad under Yerovam and Rechavam. Now, are they serving idol? Is it because of idol worship? It doesn't seem to be. No, for some reason things get really bad under Yerovam and Rechavam, and we have to understand why. Now, the most interesting thing is during Yoshaphat and Achav, all of a sudden things are great again. Let me put my marker here now. I'll draw a line here. Under Achav and Yoshaphat, we reach a high point, and Achav brings in all this idol worship. Remember, the Ve'ebao and Asherah. How could things go good under Achav and Yoshaphat if they're not so religious? Then that all falls apart. Yehu does this great revolt. Yehu gets rid of all the idol worship, and under his reign, things get really bad. Almost everything falls apart. Finally, under Uzziah and Yerovam, things get better again. Okay? There's not too much idol worship, but it's not really ideal yet. But then, after Yotam, Yoash, and Achaz, things start going bad before we're not religious. Achaz is the first one to leave God, but he's leaving God because God's not good to them. And Chizkiel recovers, he's like really from, but the recovery doesn't last very long. Things go really bad under Menachem. Finally, they get better under Yoshia, who's a really religious king, but despite he's so religious and so good, everything falls apart. He dies in Megiddo, and then the whole kingdom falls apart. So what I'm trying to explain is that you would expect there'd be a correlation between how firm we are and and the y-axis. It turns out that there isn't that correlation. Now, that's exactly what Nevi'im Achronim have to deal with. Why are things, and later we'll see even earlier Nevi'im, as we get to Isaiah, Yeshayahu, why is God allowing Ashur to basically wipe out the northern kingdom and the rest of Israel when we're really not so bad compared to how we were in the time of Achav? Why is God so angry with us? Now, the biggest destruction by Ashur comes during the reign of Chizkiel. The 10 tribes are lost during the time of Chizkiel. All the cities of Judah are wiped out during the time of Chizkiel. Lachish is wiped out, and Chizkiel is the firmest king we ever had. So how could God allow that to happen? Yoshiel does the greatest reform. Remember the two big Passovers, Chizkiel and Yoshiel, and then Bavel comes in and wipes us out. So what all the Nevi'im have to deal with is that why is God not helping us? Why are all these enemies so successful against us, even though we have a temple and we're serving God so nicely? And when we're serving other gods, when we're worshiping Baal and Asherah, things are dafka good, like in the time of Achav. Anyone ever wonder about that when they were learning? First, I want to check. Anyone notice?
Well, we learned that in Achav's time that there were no lashon hara, that the people got along one with the other.
Okay,
so he had the biggest borders.
Again, that only strengthens the question. But why is that the only reason why things are good? But it doesn't explain why things go bad when we're still religious.
I mean, to some extent.
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I did notice that. I noticed that, and I mean, to some extent, like Achav, maybe because he's so successful, he becomes involved with idol worship, and that he's interacting with the other nations, and that's why maybe that's sort of like going the other direction. Like because they're so successful, then you end up getting involved with idol worship.
I'll start with Achav, like you're mentioning. Achav does several things, which puts the country back on the map, makes it strong again. He makes peace, number one, with Yehoshaphat. With the king of the north, that's a big move. Like you mentioned, that's achdut, that's for sure. Not just within the people of Israel, but among the tribes. Number two, he makes a treaty with Sidon. Why does he marry Zevel? There's no shortage of Jewish women to marry. When he marries Zevel, that's part of a political treaty and an economic treaty with the port city of Sidon, with the Phoenicians, and that opens up a giant trade route in the whole Mediterranean basin. The economy thrives because Sidon offers the port to the Mediterranean, and Achav has the land route down south, the two together. It's a win-win. If Achav is working together with Yehoshaphat, and we have this area of the international highway, and we have the port city of Sidon, and we're all working together, the economy is going to go great. Now, what price does Achav pay when he makes the political treaty with Sidon? Zevel's price tag is you need to bring Western culture in. We just like to call Hollywood and McDonald's. That's Baal and Asherah, if you want to take a modern day analogy. In other words, you want to make a treaty with the Phoenicians, you have to accept the same culture. Achav wasn't philosophically a great believer in Baal. That was the price he had to pay for Izebel. You want to work with Izebel? She comes with her rabbis and her culture. Now, what's Eliyahu trying to do? Eliyahu is hoping he can get rid of Izebel but keep Achav. Achav is the most popular. If you've been to Megiddo, for example, the waterworks that Achav did. If you've been to Megiddo, it's just mind-boggling how strong they were. In archaeology, they love Achav because Achav's mentioned in outside sources. You know what happens in archaeology? If something's mentioned in the Bible, it's assumed not true unless proven otherwise. If something's mentioned in any outside source, it must be true unless proven wrong. In other words, but Achav's mentioned by other kings and in a positive way. He's a super powerful king. What's Eliyahu trying to do? Eliyahu's trying to keep all the success of Achav and surgically get rid of Izebel. And that's why he stops the rain. And it doesn't work. I'm sure you read that work. Okay, well, I'll get to Bob's question about Shlomo in a minute, about what he did wrong. That was Besof Yamav. We reached a high point in the beginning of his days, but you're right. What Bob's saying, that when Shlomo, in the end of his days, when he follows other gods, that's when things fall apart. But we're going to see a double reason for that. Because the reason things fall apart is primarily because of the split kingdom. And the reason things fall apart in the kingdom, the Navi is saying, it's because of the Avodah Zarah he did. Shlomo didn't serve other gods. What did he do? He went international. Remember when he marries the daughter of Pharaoh? That's not, again, because there aren't enough Jewish women to marry. That's a political treaty with Egypt. And to be a nation making a name for God. Now we have a temple. We can make God's name great. You want to have international relations because you want other people to come and visit you. And that's exactly Shlomo's prayer when he builds the temple. Let me show you real quick. This is key to understanding what goes wrong. If I open up Sefer Melakhim, where are we? Let's do the Hebrew, will be a lot easier. No, do the English, fine. Hebrew's fine. Nevi'im, Melachim, Aleph, okay. And Perachet. He builds the temple. He has a great prayer, place to do tshuva and pray to God, etc. And then, in the end of his prayer, this is the first time we have something like this. Here, what's he say here in? Should be in a parsha break here. In Pasuk Mem Aleph here. V'gam elon nochri asher lo memcha Yisrael uba me'eretz rocha l'man shemecha. The first time we have non-Jews coming to Israel for guidance. We're reaching a biblical goal of being a light to other nations. Even a non-Jew, a nochri, who's not part of the Jewish people, is coming from a faraway land for the sake of your name and your reputation. Why? Ki shmuna shimcha gadol, your great name, and your outstretched hand, and all the miracles you do. And then uba v'tpalel habayta, he'll come and pray in this house because he's getting guidance from us. Shlomo's praying that God should answer the prayers of the non-Jew coming to the temple. So all nations should know your name and your reputation, that they should fear you, just like that Am Yisrael fears you, and to know that your name is associated with this house. Then it talks about what happens when we have trouble in battle, we come here to pray, etc. But it's a place to do tshuva. Shlomo makes a big deal that you come to daven not for your needs, you're not coming as a consumer, you're coming as an employee, and if God brings the war, it's because you've done something wrong. It goes back beforehand. If there's a drought, why? Because we sinned. If there's a war, if there's a famine in the land, etc., it's why? Because we've done something wrong. We have to sue. Okay? You have to, we come to pray, to ask ourselves, why is God punishing us for what's going wrong? So we don't come to the temple and pray, save us from our enemies, give us rain, give us prosperity. If we're in war, there's a drought, we come to God and ask ourselves, what can we do better? Why is God not happy with our behavior? We go basically hear the rabbi's speech. And that's the tefillah that Shlomo talks about in his prayer. On top of that, he says it's even open for non-Jews coming. But his goal is to make God's name great to other nations. Now, you get into this idea that making God's name great to other nations, Am Yisrael starts growing too fast, too quickly. And what do? Who do they turn to? So he marries not just the daughter of Pharaoh. In every nation around, he marries a daughter from that king. In other words, he opens up relations with those other kings, with those other nations. Now, all of his foreign wives, he built for them basically embassies in Jerusalem, like the house he built for Bat Paro in the Milo, that Sefer Melakhim talks about. What's it mean? We have now international trade. Instead of most people being in agriculture and living near the home and family, now you have engineers, you have architects, you have builders, you have traders, you have people traveling internationally as well, and other people coming in, and the country's growing too quickly and not carefully enough. And instead of our becoming an influence on them, they become an influence on us. Now, if you're going to take a foreign wife for the need of foreign relationships, they need an embassy, they need translators, they need, documents, they bring in whatever they bring in, they need their culture. So they come to you on Friday night and you have their gefilte fish, and you go to them Messiah Shabbos and watch movies. You all of a sudden your culture becomes mixed and you grow too quickly. And you expand too quickly and it gets out of control. And when Chazal say that Shlomo didn't serve other gods, but he allowed his wives to get away with it, means he allowed that foreign culture to enter the country. He meant well, but it grew too fast. That led to the it wasn't Shlomo was an idol worshiper. He allowed his wives, he took the foreign wives for political reasons, for even divine reasons, to make God's name great. But they had too big of an influence. He grew way too fast. And that led people to follow all these other gods. And then God had to put an end to it and brought Egypt into and split the kingdom. So now, what I want to explain is this. I want to go now to the second half of Sefer Melakhim. What the Nevi'im have to come to explain is it's not enough to pray to God. If I go back to my to the sine wave we saw, during this time period here, I'll draw a line here again here. During this time period, things are getting really, really bad with Ashur. And it's not that bad. Idol worship only begins in the time of Achaz, and Achaz is angry with God because during Yoash and Uziel, especially during Yotam and Yoash Melech Yisrael, things start getting bad. Ashur starts becoming powerful. So what's he going to do? Isaiah has to explain why is God angry with us, even though the temple is standing and we're serving God properly. So Isaiah comes with this crazy idea that it's not enough to bring korbanot and pray. You also have to have a just society. And that correlation between just society and kindness and what's called social justice and God's help, that comes as a bombshell to people. Because the assumption of most people is if you have a temple and you pray to God and you bring sacrifices and you pray, God should help you because we come as consumers. Isaiah is saying your prayers are meaningless. That was the first chapter of Isaiah. He's screaming it. Your prayers are meaningless if your society is corrupt. And that message is difficult to give even to this day. When Israel is in trouble, they say, pray more, say more Tehillim, bring more prayers, daven harder. But how many rabbis talk about fixing society and being just and upright and kind? And all things Isaiah talks about. And what Isaiah has to explain to the people, not Isaiah, also Shea and Michal, all the Nevi'im of his time period, are saying they have to explain why is God allowing Ashur to wipe us out, even though we're praying to God in the temple. Yirmiyahu is going to have the same problem later on. Why is God allowing Bavel to wipe us out, even though the temple is standing and we're so religious? Remember, Chizkiel made that great Passover, made the whole big brit, return to God. So did Yoshio. So they built up the temple and they brought all these korbanot and they prayed, but society was still corrupt from the inside. And God had now, what happens is, and this goes back to what Jordan was talking about, why is it worse? If we're not serving God in the temple and we're corrupt, okay, we're like everybody else. God gets angriest the most when we're religious and we're unjust. In other words, if you're in the temple waving the flag, I'm God's people, you bring sacrifices to God, you pray to God, you make a big deal about his temple, but the people serving God in the temple are unjust and unkind and lack social justice and honesty and truth and kindness, etc. But they're coming praying to God, claiming to be God's people. That's when God gets the most angry. That's exactly Isaiah chapter 1. I just read 2 lines because it was in the material. Listen, I'm trying to explain why there's so many Nevi'im here during the time period of when Ashur comes in. Listen what he says, Yeshayahu in Perek. Where are we? Yeshayahu, just in the beginning, famous Perek Aleph. What's he tell them? Yeah. I'd like to say here. This has to be during time of Chizkiel because this is after Ashur wiped us out. But Yeshayahu is still Chizkiel is still king. Only Jerusalem's left over. Lachish is destroyed. So he says we're like Sdom and Amorah. He says, remember all the korbanot they brought during Chizkiel's time? God says, who needs them? Okay? Basically, God says, don't give me that bull. I don't need your okay? So it's not just korbanot I don't want. When you come to visit me in my temple, you're trespassing. Okay? I don't want to see you here. Don't bring me these meaningless presents you bring me. And the Torah, etc. It's a abomination to me. Your Rosh Chodesh parties, your Shabbos celebration. When you gather together, I can't take it. Okay? Your Rosh Chodesh parties and your holidays, I hate them. Okay? They annoy me. I can't. And when you lift up your hands in prayers, okay, I'm not looking. Do you why? You can have lots and lots of tefillah and not listening because your hands are full of blood. You don't care about human life. Yes, clean up your ways, get rid of your evil. Get it? Teach to do mishpat and do tzedakah. Okay? Ashur chamatz shiftu yatom dat riba amana. And then he says, and if you do that, I can clean away your sins. If not, you're finished. And then echayta d'zona kirin amana meleti mishpat tzedek elimba batam ratzchim. Okay? Everything's full of counterfeit. Kaspei chayal sigim. Okay? All your ministers in your government, they're all rotten. They're all unjust. They take bribes. They steal. They all like taking bribes. And only after money, instead of using their power to help the poor and the needy and the widow and the orphan, they don't care about them at all. And therefore, God's so angry. And I'm going to bring my shoftim back like the good old days. Only afterwards it'll be called in your tzedek. And then what will bring redemption? All these things make it to Shmon Esrei. And Hashiva Shoftim Kurishona is built on this. But you understand why Isaiah is so, why no one listens to him. The people are so religious in this time period, and God's allowing Ashur to wipe us out. And Isaiah is saying, it's not about your sacrifice, it's not about your prayers, not about your temple. You come to the temple to remember how to serve God. But it's because you're so religious, I can't allow that to go on. Because if we weren't religious, if we weren't serving God, and we're unjust, okay. But when you claim to be God's people and you're unjust, that's worse. And that's what's so harsh about Yeshayahu. And that's why the most difficult punishments come when we're the frommest. And that's such a hard message that the Nevi'im are giving. I'll just share you one line from Micha because he's probably listen to Micha in chapter. I'll just open up Micha real fast. It's all the same time period. I want Micha. Micha should be right in here somewhere. You'll almost have an idea. Micha in chapter 3. Just 3 lines of Micha, which are, Shimud Roshei Beit Yaakov, listen up to leaders of Israel, the heads of your government and your people running the show. Hamitabim Mishpat, but Koi Shari Yakeshu. Now, justice, they can't stand doing justice. Everything straight, they make crooked. Okay? Bunetzim Bedamim. Okay? They're building up Zion, they're building all these building projects, but they don't care about people's lives. Workers are being killed, and Yerushalayim is built with iniquity. Okay? Rosheh b'shochad yishpotu, its leaders take bribes, and that's how they judge things. The rabbis, the priests in the temple do everything for money. The Nevi'im, the other religious leaders, do everything for money as well. And despite that, oh, we're God's people, God's in our midst, nothing bad will happen to us. And therefore, it's because of that, it's because your religious leaders are unjust and corrupt, and your political leaders are corrupt, and you claim to be God's people. That's why God has to destroy the city. You can't represent God if you're not just and upright. If you're not representing God, right? Other gods, okay. It's not good, but you're not getting your job done. You're not making me look bad. It's because you're so religious, God has to take away the temple because of that lack of justice. That's the Zechariah on the 4 fast days. We can go on and on. But that's like probably the most primary message of all the Nevi'im. But I'd like to joke around all the time. I say that's why the Yeshiva is non-profit. People don't like studying Nevi'im because he's really harsh. The Nevi'im are super harsh and people don't like hearing it to this day. Anyway, so back to Sefer, we're gonna run out of time in a minute. Back to our Sefer Melakhim. So in light of that, I'm trying to explain what's the reason for the ups and downs. Now, there's two things happening. One is there's no doubt whenever there's a civil war, things fall apart for natural reasons. Because when you're working together, north and south together, you're strong enough to control the international highway, the Via Maris. You control the trade, and you become a superpower, and people want to look up to you and want to work with you. The second of a split kingdom, someone else takes over. And the coastal plain, called the international highway that connects Egypt to Mesopotamia, is always going to be controlled by a superpower because it's a key trade route that someone has to control. If we're strong enough, we control it, and we're doing great. If we're not controlling it, someone else is going to take over. And that's exactly the sine wave that I showed you. We'll look at it again. I'm sorry, I just lost it. I lost it again. 1 second. Stop the share. No, we don't want that. Stop that share. We want to share this one. Watch when the superpowers come in. When we're fighting, when David and Shaul is fighting with Shaul, etc., the Plishtim are running around in the end of the Shoftim. When Mered, Yerovam, and Rechavam and Rechavam split the kingdom, Egypt takes over. When Yehu gets his great revolt, and here's strange, he listens to God, remember, and wipes out the house of Yehu. But then Natalia comes and wipes out, basically north and south are split with each other again. Aram takes over. And then later when finally Ashur wipes everybody out at the end. But during these time periods, in the first half of Sefer Melakhim, it's when we're united, things are good. When we're not united, things are bad. That's the theme of, that someone mentioned, the Midrash about Achav. It's that being united is already a reason for things to go well. Now, I want to go back now to the split kingdom because that starts with Yerovam and Rechavam. From what you remember, did God want a split kingdom or not? Whose idea was it? Who decided there's going to be a split kingdom? Was there a prophet involved or not?
Who?
A little louder?
Say it louder. Achia, he says.
Yeah, Achia Shiloni, he appointed Rechavam to take over the kingdom, correct? Now, but God didn't want a split kingdom, he wanted a shared kingdom. I'll explain what I mean. The original idea was for Yerushalayim to remain the place for God to be served. Yerushalayim is supposed to be the religious capital of the land. The economy and the army was supposed to move to Ephraim. In other words, God didn't want Yerovam to build another house for God in Bethel. He didn't want the tribes to be totally cut off from each other. He wanted the center of political power be in Ephraim with Yerovam, because again he was a workers' leader. He was a good people's leader, and God was upset with the corruption at the end of time of Shlomo and under Rechavam, and the beginning of Rechavam. But God didn't want a split kingdom; He wanted a shared kingdom. If you want to take the example like a president and a prime minister that Israel has, in an ideal sense, the president would have been Yehuda and the prime minister would have been in Ephraim. Now, what do Chazal say? Chazal say that God tells Yerovam, I want you and Ben Ishai and God, let's all work together. That's the Mateo and Gan Eden, the Chazal say. He says, Yerovam, you and Ben Ishai and God, let's all work on this together. Yerovam asks the question, Mi Barosh, who's going to lead? And God says, Ben Ishai Barosh. And Malchut David will be still in charge like the main person. And Rechavam says, then I want out. So if I'm not in charge, I'm not willing to share my kingdom. It's got to be, if I'm not running everything, I'm not joining anyone else in with me. What they're getting at is that Yerovam, God wanted people in the northern kingdom still to go to Yerushalayim to serve God and not have another temple, an alternate temple in Bethel. And Yerovam, for political reasons, he does religious reform. I'll try to explain that because the phrase that repeats itself over and over again is all the kings up north. Vayas Rabbi Hashem, just like who? Like Bechatot Rabbi ben Nevad. What was so bad about Yerovam? Bamot are not idol worship, in case you didn't follow. Bamot is serving God, but not in Yerushalayim. I call them shtiblach. Bamot is basically, Bamot were permitted when there's no Mishkan. Bamot were permitted in the time of Shmuel. Bamot were permitted in the time of David. Even during even all the good kings, there's still Bamot. You can't get rid of them. But another central Bama in Beit El, we'll see. And the other one in Dan, we'll see why that's going to cause a big split in the kingdom. So what I want to show you, let's open up Sefer Melakhim now. Here, we don't want this one. Yeah, this one, but I'll open up an English Hebrew one. Go back to Sefer Melakhim. Where's Melakhim? Aleph Perek 12. Listen to what when they go to war. Remember, two things. Rehoboam wants to go to war, and a Navi goes and talks to him and tells him, I'm sorry, that was the thing with Yerovam. They're about to go to war, and here. When God tells Rehoboam, don't fight, he doesn't fight. He thought he was doing the right thing. God had to tell him doing the wrong thing. Then Yerovam built up Shechem, etc. Then here's the key part. Yerovam now becomes king up north. Now, the Navi tells us this, but Yerovam didn't tell this to anybody. This is Yerovam telling himself. For political reasons, he's afraid of people going to Yerushalayim and bring korbanot there. And what's he do now? He's going to institute religious reform for political reasons. Now, he's not going to say, I'm doing this for political reasons. He's going to claim he's doing it for religious reasons. Listen what he says. Now, I'll follow, I think, the way Rabbi Dan explained it when I was back in Yeshiva. The Navi is calling them Aglei Zahav. He's calling them Kruvim. What's Yerovam Shita? God Shechina knows the centrality of Yerushalayim. That was a big mistake. Malchut David is not legitimate. And he wants to delegitimize Malchut David. Therefore, Yerushalayim is not legitimate. God Shechina is everywhere. And the Shechina is between the Kruvim. And therefore, he makes one Kruv at the southern border in Beit El, another Kruv in Dan, in the northern border. And God Shechina is between Beit El and Dan. It was Melocho Etz Kvodo, as he would say. And what's he do? He undoes the kuna. He lets anyone who wants to become a kohen. In other words, he's going back to the situation pretty much before Chet HaEgel. It's not by chance his two sons are named Nadav and Aviyah. That's Rehoboam's two sons. I mean, Yeroboam's two sons. And he's doing things that sound just like what Aaron does. But what he's doing is he wants to go back and saying this whole idea of only Yerushalayim, only one place, that's corrupt. Only Kohanim, that's all corrupt. Let's go back to the idea where anyone can become a Kohen and you can bring korbanot everywhere. He's doing a religious reform, but he's doing it for political reasons. Now, the Navi describes it like Chet HaEgel to say that it was wrong. But he's sure he's doing the right thing. He puts one in Beit El and one in Dan. Got it? And that led people astray. People went all the way to Dan to follow them. Then he makes Bamot everywhere. Okay, he makes his own Kohanim, Biksot Am, who weren't from Bnei Levi. Now, Rava makes a Chag b'Chodesh Hashmini. The Chag is Sukkot. Now, he didn't say it's the 8th month. He called it the 7th month. Who's in charge of the calendar? Beit Din. Beit Din sits in Yerushalayim. But if you don't accept Yerushalayim, Beit Din now sits in Beit El. So he has an alternate Rabbanut. And they're deciding the calendar now. So he makes his calendar to make sure that it's not in sync with the one in Yehuda. So the people come now to Rehoboam to celebrate Sukkot in Beit El. Okay? On the 15th, like the Chag in Yehuda. Now, the Navi is making fun of him, calling him Agalim, but the people are doing it to serve God. That's why in chapter 13 we have the whole story with the Navi from Beit El and Navi, that strange story with the Navi from Beit El and Navi from Yehuda, who get into a fight over the legitimacy of Beit El. What I'm getting at is that all through Beit Rishon, people up north are sure they're doing the right thing. They think Bamot are permitted. It's like telling people nowadays you can only daven in the great synagogue. You can't daven in a breakaway minute. There's only one shul for everybody. People don't buy it. You want like a backyard religion. Now, later the Nevi'im are going to complain about the Bamot become corrupt. But the second there's not a centralized authority running temple service, then Bamot become like consumer service. You're turning to God in prayer for your needs. You're not hearing a rabbi's speech. You're not coming together to learn Torah, to get guidance. The whole system of Yerushalayim is that to be one central system where everyone comes on a regular basis, Aliyah Regel, and they ask their religious questions. The Kohanim are in charge of education, and everything's organized in a hierarchy system. The second you make it a free-for-all, everything falls apart. And therefore, Avodat Bamot, the people thinking they're religious, but their Avodat Hashem is corrupt. And that's what got so angry. That's why the Bamot lead people astray. Later, Achab brings in Mamash idol worship. Again, for financial reasons, that people accept it. But the Avodat Bamot is not Avodah Zarah. It's not serving other gods. It's serving the right God the wrong way. It's like what some people would call nowadays, those who think that going to Meron or going to Uman is wrong. That's how they would view. I'm not saying it is. That's a big argument among rabbis. But they're serving God, but some people they're serving God the wrong way or not in an ideal manner. But it leads to a misunderstanding of the religion and people serving God like crazy, but acting unjust and corrupt. And that's a danger of Bamot without proper education and authority. So either way, what happens is, question?
Why did he say, he was afraid of being killed? It's the beginning of his Vayomer Belibo.
People go to Yerushalayim, they want to go back to the good old days, and they'll rebel against them. How do you get rid of him? You kill him. I say get rid of, if you don't like the king, you assassinate him. It works sometimes. Like what happens all through history. It usually causes another rebellion. But now what the Navi basically saying is everyone's report card are the Bamot is the trouble. Remember? The Bamot just don't lead to idol worship, they lead to not serving God the right way. When you're serving God in Bamot, and religion is left to your neighborhood rabbi who's on his own, everyone can make their own little shtibo and stuff, then everything falls apart. Chumash had a system of Torah coming from Kohanim, teaching Levim, teaching the people. It was supposed to be centralized and organized, focusing on the core themes of being Jewish. And then they turn Judaism into a religion, basically, where people turning Bamot to pray to God for their personal needs. It becomes a consumer religion. And then everything falls apart. Now, when Eliyahu, because things were so good under Achav, Eliyahu was hoping to get rid of Yezebel by stopping the rain, proving Avodat Baal was wrong, and it backfired. And that's the whole story. That's all Shurim you probably had on Eliyahu. Reb Senda talks about whether God's teaching Eliyahu a lesson. No, it's don't use Midat Adin. It's not going to work. But that's a whole topic in Eliyahu and Elisha. But the neatest thing is that if you notice with Elisha, you notice all the miracles Elisha does, which are a total anomaly in Sefer Melakhim or in Jewish history. They're like out of the New Testament because in the New Testament, Elisha is the model that their Messiah follows. Why? What happened when Eliyahu goes to God and back to Har Sinai and resigns, doesn't he? And God accepts his resignation. He gives him 3 things to do. Remember what's he tell him? To make Elisha the Navi instead of you, make Chazal the king of Aram, and make you the king of Israel. Now, Eliyahu only does one of those things. Eliyahu makes Elisha the Navi, and Elisha is totally different than Eliyahu. Everybody has a totally different approach. Eliyahu is fire, midat adin, punishment. Elisha is Mr. Nice Guy. Then make Chazal the king of Aram, which Eliyahu doesn't do. Elisha does that. Okay? Then make you the king of Israel. That's not Elisha's Talmid does that. So it takes a while. When it's over, though, what happens? Chazael gives Israel a really hard time. Leads to war up in the Golan, in the Galil and Golan, in Iver Yarden, in Transjordan. In the middle of that war, people are really angry with House of Achav already, with Achav's sons. That leads to Yehu's revolt. Yehu's revolt is the people's revolt. And Yehu, who gets rid of Yezebel finally? What Eliyahu wanted to happen 20 years earlier, Yehu does, with no problem, and the people are behind him. Eliyahu did the miracle, and it didn't affect anybody. He was hoping the people would get rid of Yezebel. It didn't work. Because Yezebel was, they believed Eliyahu has superpowers, but Eliyahu was the enemy of Israel because he used the superpowers to hurt his own people. It basically backfired. Now, Yehu becomes king. thanks to this nevuah, etc. And what happens? Everything Achab built falls apart. Why? He kills Izebel. There goes our economic relationship with Sidon. Because Achab built up an empire. By killing Izebel, there goes Sidon and your whole Middle East economic connection. Yehu kills the king of Yehuda and the whole royal family from Yehuda. And then Natalia retaliates, remember, by killing all the from people in Yehuda's family. And basically, there's no one left in Malchut Yehuda except that little baby Yoash. But the connection, the relation between Yisrael and Yehuda is ruined. The whole coalition that Achab built up between Yehoshaphat and Achav, they all fell apart. Now, so these Bnei Nevi'im who now start this religious revolt against idol worship, they destroy the Baal, but the country falls apart. Do you understand why? All the economic success that we reached under Achav falls apart thanks to this religious revolt of Yehu. Now, when Israel falls apart, who are the people going to blame? The religious fanatics who got rid of the house of Achav. Who made Yehu king? Elisha and his Navi. Got it? And therefore, there's a lack of faith in the institution of a Navi. What does Elisha have to prove to everybody? Yesh Navi b'Yisrael. And Elisha has to go around proving himself. It's not that there are Navim and the Navim can do things. Now, and he goes around helping people. He has to rebuild the faith in the education system in the Bnei Navim and has to reform the kingdom. Finally, we get to Yoash and Rehoboam, and Yoash and things finally get better. But it's Elisha's job to pretty much reestablish the people's faith in the system of the Navim that Eliyahu had ruined because of his strict policy of so many people died when they stopped the rain, and when we lost all those wars to Aram, etc., and we lost our economic ties with Sidon. With all this revolt trying to make the people better again, everything backfired. It's going to take 30, 40 years until we establish until we get to Yerovam, the second Yerovam, and Uziel, and Israel gets strong again. We finally get strong again, and that's the time period early of Isaiah. We're doing great, and our economy is great. That's the chapter 2 of Isaiah. The country's full of gold and silver, and everyone's great. But then they become haughty and obnoxious, and God says, "I've had it with you," and He sends Ashur to punish them. Remember, you'll read next week already, but Hoyashur Shevet Api. So basically, when you read Melachim, it sounds like everything is so bad all the time because it's a book about what we're doing wrong. It's not a book about all of our history. There's a lot of good things we don't hear about. The top of the book isn't everything that happened. It's the prophet's attempt to get Israel back on the right track. But bottom line, there are two core causes of everything falling apart. Yerovam's religious, reform for political reasons led to the ruining of the whole religious system. The people's behavior during that time period is far from ideal. We're not a nation other nations look up to because we're a beacon of justice and righteousness. All Shlomo's prayers about all the nations coming to us never fulfills itself during the time during all through Beit Rishon. We're barely, we're fighting with ourselves all the time. We're so busy. We're so worried about our political needs and our own strength. We're not focusing enough on our religious needs, as far as not religion, as far as bringing korbanot, but religion as far as being a nation representing God. And we finally get religious, it's even worse because we don't represent God properly because our nation remains corrupt, our society remains corrupt. Now, that's a really harsh God. The idea that this concept that a God judges you based on your society that you build, as opposed to based on your prayers, it's such a strange topic when it comes to religion. People don't buy it. But they didn't buy it. That's when you'll be reading Nevi'im Achronim now. That's what they talk about all the time. God's angry because of our corrupt society. And He has to punish when the people running that corrupt society are dafka religious and turning to God in prayer, but not fixing their ways. That's where God's the most angry, and that's where Nevi'im Achronim come in and present the problem. So that we'll see. We'll do next week. We'll do Yeshayahu in detail, and we'll see all the themes in Chumash she's talking about. But let me just conclude with this. If you go back and look at all the charts, etc., things again, Ashur comes in and wipes out the 10 tribes and most of Judah during Chizkiyahu's religious reform. when you get to Yoshiel, Bavel comes in and wipes us out after Yoshiel's great reform. Remember, Yoshia got rid of all the idol worship, fixed up the temple and everything still falls apart. Again, Yoachim, we'll see later on, rebels against God. We'll see all that. This we'll deal with when we study Yirmiyahu. But the time period of Isaiah, of Yeshayahu, he begins with Bimei Uziel Yerovam, telling the people, things are great now, but you're not using your prosperity properly. If you don't fix your ways, I'm going to bring Ashur to punish you. They don't listen. And Ashur starts coming in during Yotam, and then under Achaz. And then under Achaz, God's so angry that with God Achaz is so angry with God because he doesn't help them against Ashur. He turns to other gods. Chizkiyahu tries to fix that, but it's too late. And then Menachem totally rebels against God. But finally, he comes back, and then we have the great reform under Yoshiel. Again, that's all topic for, this would be the topic of Yeshayahu. This would be the topic of Yirmiyahu and Yechezkel. That'll keep you busy for the next month or two in the Shnayim Mikra. So that header in the book of Isaiah in the beginning, this area, this time period, one second, let me mark the marker there. I'll go back to annotate. Where are we? Annotate. Yeah, this is the background for it from, no, that's the wrong one. Anyway, this is here we are, annotate and draw. It's this time period that Yeshayahu is talking about all the time. It's the most difficult. Again, why is Ashur so powerful, even though we're so religious under Chizkiyahu? And with Yirmiyahu, we have the same problem over here with Bavel and the fall of Yoshiel, etc. Let me check the questions real fast. Chat was, why are mother's name? Mother, I'm talking about that. Okay, we did. Okay, with Moshe for. I'm sorry. What's this one? Okay, we did the mothers. Okay, looking at Deuteronomy 17. Okay. There was not a. Wait a second. I can't see something's wrong with the chat here. 1 second. Open the chat bigger. There are 4. Why can't I read the chat? Okay. Many of the kings of mothers we get. Looking at Deuteronomy 17, Shlomo was in violation. There was also a land needed before to be a king. I understand the question. Bob, what was your question?
The question is looking at Devarim 17, I believe it is. That the land is supposed to be settled first before there would even be a king. And then the restrictions on the king, it seems that, like, first looking at Shaul getting appointed, God wanted Shaul to be appointed, but the land was not yet settled. It just seems like everything that's in there, all the prohibitions, were not very problematic or prominent in what happened historically after going into the land. That's what it just seems like. Was it Moshe? Was it Moshe?
When God says, when you come to land and settle it and ask for a king, he's not saying that's a necessity. He's saying that's when it's bound to happen. So the assumption is in Chumash, the assumption is going to come and conquer the land. And at a certain time, you're going to want, the idea of a kingdom is that you can't have a kingdom that people don't want a kingdom. The people have to want a kingdom for it to work. God can't command you to set up a political system of a monarchy if the people don't accept the monarchy.
Right, but it seems like that's a precondition, at least the way the translations are, that it's a precondition that the land should be settled. You need some type of
government. You can't have a country without a government. And Dafka, the land is totally conquered by the time of David. Everything's conquered.
Okay, I was thinking of Shaul at that point.
So maybe it might have been a bit premature then, but they're asking for a king for the wrong reason. If you want a king to lead you to follow God, that's what makes David different, because he makes a name for God.
Okay.
We'll get to the theme next week. We'll do the theme of Tzedek and Mishpat and Yeshayahu and Melakhim, and what makes David. But the whole idea of this whole idea that this biblical theme, that the goal isn't the Jewish people living in their land. The goal is a Jewish nation representing God. By being, you need a land to become a nation. The goal isn't living in Israel. The goal is being a nation in Israel in international spotlight by acting in a way that sanctifies God. But the second you have a temple which is screaming we're God's people, that requires top-notch behavior. And when the Jewish people have a land and they claim to be God's people and don't act properly, that's when God gets the most angry. And then he sends wake-up calls left and right. And then when the people turn to God, save us from our enemies, but don't fix their ways, God gets even more angry. And that's what brings all the destructions. Where the people are acting nicely with one another, that's enough for God not to bring a foreign enemy. That will keep us in peace.
Okay, thank you.
That's why the idea of peace, that's why the idea of achdut, and that there's such a focus in prophetic biblical history on the need for a just and upright society. And it's like screaming it, but it's now what's the danger? But that's not all of Judaism. If you don't have a temple and pray, you're not going to remember that you're God's people, what your job is. You need the balance between them. And that's the balance that doesn't work in Beit Rishon.
Thank you.
You don't have to have a king, but a king is one way to do it. God isn't saying that has to be the ideal form of government. That's should you pick a king, I have to limit the king's powers. But then say if you pick any political leader you have, he has to follow the guidelines of Torah chapter 17. This idea the king don't let power get to your head. You use power as a tool to serve God.
Okay.
Eliyahu's way backfired. So why is the Churban also not backfiring? Everyone's dispersed. What kind of God's name is there that way?
That's Yechezkel in a nutshell. Because that's why he said, I had to throw you out because you made me look bad. But being in exile, I have to bring you back because I look even worse when I'm not thinking about people that I'll bring you back, even though you don't deserve it. But you better be deserving when you come back. Then we come back and we're not deserving. Then we get through Bayit Sheni. But your question exactly Yechezkel.
Because you put the focus on Eliyahu. I never looked at Eliyahu like that. So
but saying backfired was a great play on words. Because Eliyahu is all about fire. And
to this day he's so popular. Why is he still popular 3,000 years later?
Oh, why? Because when he came to Har Sinai and told God, he complained to people, I'm zealous for you, God, and your people broke your covenant. Okay? Eliyahu tells God, your people broke your covenant. And then God tests Eliyahu, don't be so harsh on them. And to show Eliyahu that he was wrong, every time we do something covenantal, we invite him. So a Brit Milah, which is all about covenant, in case you didn't notice, Brit Milah is about covenant. So we invite Eliyahu to our covenant of Brit Milah. The Seder is Brit Ben Abtarim, which is the other covenant with God in Breshit. So we invite him to our Seder. So when there's something that has to do with covenant and our core relationship with God, we invite Eliyahu to show Eliyahu that we are still God's people. But Eliyahu's job now, his refined job is to be a teacher. His job has to, we're always God's people. The covenant can't be broken, but we have to act properly. And therefore, Eliyahu is not going to come and bring fire and punish. He'll come and teach. So bring back a better relationship between God and his people, like a parent-child relationship, like a father-son relationship. And that God's sort of teaching him the way things should be. The Midat Hadin doesn't work. It was a nice try, but backfired, as he said. Okay, what was the other question from Arlene? Why are there 4 prophets? There's so many prophets in the time of Isaiah. That was a great question. It's called there's like a plethora of prophets in the time of Isaiah because that's the biggest problem. Chizkiyahu is such a firm king, right? How is God allowing Ashur to punish us? Like, the fact that God allows an enemy, an evil nation like Ashur, to be so successful to wipe us out, I need an explanation. And all those prophets are telling the people it's because of your corrupt society, and God's sending Ashur as his whip. He says, we'll see, Hoy Ashur Shevet Api. So they're called the ethical prophets. And the biggest problem is that people are coming to the temple and praying to God, save us from this evil Ashur people. And God's not answering our prayers. And all these prophets are saying it's because your society is corrupt and the people don't buy it. But that's why there's so many of them, because that's where the problem becomes the most acute. It's because we're so religious during those time periods. And that's why, again, that's what Yirmiyahu and Necheskel have to deal with. Because the people crying to God, save us, save us. They come and pray in the temple and God doesn't answer their prayers. God says, I'm on the other side, I'm on the other team. They're really harsh. Any rabbi would say things like that today, they'd be kicked out of, they'd be definitely thrown out of the Knesset. Wouldn't get a job anywhere. because prophets tell people what they need to hear, not what they want to hear. And usually the people say what the people want to hear, and then they become popular. Okay, why does it focus on Avodah Zarah? Okay, the Avodah Zarah topic, that's exactly what I'm getting at. The Bamot is not idol worship. It's idol worship ideally, not IDLOL. There aren't these big philosophical people who are believing in a tree god and a rain god, etc. When the Nevi'im call Avodat Baal, Yirmiyahu is going to call the people of Baal. Why? When you're in consumer mode, what's Avodat Baal? Baal is a rain god. If I want rain and I want fertility in my land, if I'm a farmer and I want rain at the right time and I want fertility, I go to Baal for rain and I show up for fertility. And I have to do a rain dance, I praise them, I do a dance, I feed them, whatever I do. And the hope is that if I do my ritual properly, those gods will give me my rain and my prosperity. But you're coming to them as a consumer. Now, Chumash is telling us there's one God in charge of all those powers. That's what we say in Shema. But he judges us and gives us rain and prosperity based on our deeds. Now, when you turn to you believe in your God of Israel, but you only turn to him as a consumer, asking God to help us for rain and for prosperity, but you don't fix your behavior, and you don't see yourself as an employee, you don't see yourself representing, and you're corrupt and unjust, God doesn't listen to your prayers. Now, God doesn't listen to your prayers, so people think, oh, so what do you call it? So why try other gods? If our God's not listening, try other gods. Then they turn to other gods. Then they do really idol worship to other idols. But they're upset with God because God doesn't answer prayer. I'll show you one line which has to do with davening. It's Isaiah, but it's going to be probably in 2 weeks. It's here. He screams it in Isaiah 59. Just 2 lines. See? This is what he says. Hein lo katzra yad Hashem Yehoshia, v'lo chavda Hashem bishmoa. God's hand is not too short to help, and his ears are not hard of hearing. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes God doesn't help, and sometimes he doesn't hear. Why? Not that he can't hear and he can't help. Your sins are causing the mechitza, the break between you and your God, and your God's not listening, not because he's hard of hearing. It's he can't hear because of your sins. He can't help because of your iniquity. Why? This one says, "Keep achim niglu badam v'svotechem ba'avon siftim dibur sheker l'shonam avla b'tegeh in korei b'tzedek in yishva b'emunah b'toch hatov v'daber shav." He goes on about how unjust we are. Okay, ragleim l'ra yerutzu v'meru d'shpoch dam naki machshvot shoshod v'shever etc. Derech shalom lo yedau v'mishpat b'magodotam. It goes on and on. Al-Kain Rachok Mishpat Mimenu, Lo Tesigut Tzedakah, Kebelo Bini Choshech. It goes, and then finally, despite all that, this comes happening. Ultimately, L'Tzion Goel, we say this in davening, U'L'Shavei Fesha B'Yakov Nem Hashem. Ultimately, for those who do tshuva, God will bring redemption. Why? Because of the brit God made with us, and God Ruach is with them all the time. We're always God's people. We always have the chance of redemption and return, but it has to come with proper tshuva. That's what Nevi'im are about. But it's a really harsh message they're giving. And that's why there are a lot of nice haftarot we like to read, but if you don't understand the time period, and when you don't realize how frum they are under Isaiah, under Chizkiyahu, and under Yoshiyahu, and when the worst punishments come when we're the frummest, that's the only way you really appreciate what Nevi'im Achronim have to say. Yeah, Ben?
Yeah, so what I meant in the question I wrote in the chat, I was wondering, like, so why is it that the writer of Melachim, I assume it's Yirmiyahu, why is he focusing so much on the Avodah Zarah aspect? Why can't he just paint the picture as is? Why do I have to go all the way back to Isaiah to find
that's
that?
in his book. Yeah. What he calls idol worship, I call idol worship ideally, not ideal. And he's complaining, we'll see later, he explains it in Yirmiyahu. The Bamot is not serving another God. Bamot, they're complaining about Bamot all the time. Bamot is you're serving the right God, but without education, but the wrong way. Bamot is basically consumer religion as opposed to employee religion. But when people go to the Bamot, people turn to God for help. If it wasn't so obvious, it's so prevalent to this day. Most people, when they come in daven, they're coming in consumer mode to God, not in employee mode. And it's just you see the problem today. It's the same It was the
And they're
same
not
problem
looking
back
to
then.
see how they could worship God, but rather what they could get out of him instead.
What's motivating prayer is what's in it for us. They want prosperity, they want war, to win wars and things like that. And that's not what Chumash is about. But that's a hard message to teach. People, it's so hard to sell.
Right. So I guess that's why the Navi in Melachim itself is like not elaborating on that fact, not mentioning all those things, but rather just saying how things were just bad.
The focusing on the split kingdom is a big problem in Melachim, and following and the lack of unity and the lack of unity leads to the civil wars and the lack of justice, and it becomes a militaristic society, and people just surviving. In order to build a society representing God, there has to be unity of purpose and unity of working together and listening. And that's why when unity is there, things work out well. But you need unity, and together we're serving God properly.
All right, I got it. One more question, if I may.
Yeah.
This is like more of a point question. I don't know how much there is to that question, but I was just like, throughout the learning of Menachem, I noticed there's a few times, 3 or 4 times, maybe more, where there is an event that happens at the beginning, or maybe even prior to this book, and then later on the Navi goes back to that and says, oh, this and this happened, and that was the result of that. Let's say with Chiel's kids dying after he built Yericho.
This is Elisha predicted the same thing with the guy with the Navi who, what do you call it? Who said
with the Navi, yeah. Well, like
yeah.
many years later, by the time of Mashiach, okay, I mean,
and just like
I
Eliel
believe
said,
that happened, but the Navi like feels like he has to tell us that this actually happened.
He has to prove his point that there's nevuah. Don't listen to the Navi. They have to build credibility. There's no doubt there's building of credit. Part of the reason for the books is to build credibility in the Navim. Listen to them. But bottom line, it didn't. God stops Nevuah in the beginning by Shani because it doesn't work. The only Navi people listen to is Yonah in the wrong country, and that's about it. I guess everybody didn't listen. Their message is harsh. It's so hard for you to listen. But bottom line, the book is about our failures, not about everything that happened. So the Nevi'im would give the rebuke all the time, but they're writing the book so that we can learn from our mistakes, which seems like we don't learn so much from.
Right. In light of that, I was just wondering, is there a message we could still draw from this book nowadays where we don't have Avodah Zarah? I mean, I guess now, yes, because it's talking about all the injustice.
We have idol worship, not idol worship.
Strictly out of that.
Yeah, we have the same problem with the Yirmiyah. Just read Isaiah chapter 1. That's our time period. It's probably more matim for our time period than back then. But it's built. The problem is built into religion itself. You follow? Because most religion is sold in a Western society. Religion is sold as a consumer product. Serve God and you'll have your goal is pursuit of happiness, and serve God and it'll keep you happy and wealthy. You'll have nachas, you get mazel and things like that. The idea that you're representing God, that you can sanctify God in your day-to-day life as a nation. And there's a value in how people view you, and you can have an impact on you can bring blessing to other nations, not by your existence, but by your behavior. That's a very difficult goal. But most people don't live with that goal. That's what read davening. That's what your whole prayer service is about. Remember, it's our duty to praise God, to take lula, and we're hoping the kol b'nei v'asei yikru b'shmecha. That's what Kaddish is about God's name being great. And we have a beautiful way of life, and we turn it into a religion. Not in a religion sense that becomes some super technical. There's a lot to think. Listen, there's lots of good happens. There's tons of really good religious people who do all this stuff well. It's not everybody, but at the people level, I think we're doing a great job. At the leadership level, we got a lot to. From the bottom. The bottom is very good. Like the people, there's great achdut among the people at the people's work level. Great chesed people do, great tzedakah projects and things like that. There's a lot of good. So you shouldn't paint such a negative picture. But when other nations don't view, the fact that other nations don't view you in a positive light, there's something wrong. Now, you can argue who's to blame and what's to blame. But the ideal is that other nations should look up to us out of respect and honor because of how we behave. Now, how to achieve that when everyone wants to kill you, that's how to navigate that's not easy. But Emunah is believing that if we act properly, then God will help us. But now how to act properly, again, you can argue how to act properly, what you have to focus on. But the ideas of Mishpat and Stakah, that you can't miss in all through the Nevi'im. Okay, we'll see that next week when we get to Isaiah. Isaiah is harsh. It's like, what is he harsh? Next week we do Mashallah Kerem and Perek Aleph and Perek Hey and Isaiah. They're a lot of fun. Okay. Okay, have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much,
you.
Rabbi.